"You are standing in my ditch," Bragteague said, and did not look up from the headgate wheel. The woman on the bank did not move. She held a weathered board flat against her chest, a posted notice grey with 4 winters of weather, and she waited until he turned. "I am standing in my husband's," she said. Bragteague owned the creek. Every man in the valley knew it. His deed ran bank to bank across the low water, patented and recorded at the courthouse only that year, in 1889. He had rebuilt his whole outfit on that one certainty. When the die-up of 86 and 87 took 6 head out of every 10 he owned, when the drift stood level with the corral and the cattle froze standing up, he had come out the far side of that winter with almost nothing left but the creek. Water, he had decided, was the one thing no blizzard could carry off. Now a widow he had never met was telling him the water was already spoken for. Her name was Cora Byrne. She farmed a dry quarter section a mile up the draw, ground her late husband had filed on and broken, and never once managed to wet. Bragg had seen the place. Everyone had. It was the kind of hardpan a man walked away from, and Wesley Byrne had died before he could prove it otherwise. "Then your husband was mistaken," Bragg said. "This is my land. The deed reads to the far bank and back again. The deed reads to the land." Cora turned the board so the face of it caught the light. It never once read to the water. He heard it under the flat courthouse calm of her voice and did not like the sound. It was worse than a threat. It was a woman who had read the law before she rode out to find him. Out here the law of water was not the law of ground, and the gap between them had ruined harder men than Bragteague. A deed carried the dirt. It carried the grass and the timber and the stones. It did not carry the creek. In this country a man got water one way only. He went to the stream, took some out, laid it on a crop, and the day he first turned it to good use, fixed his place in a line that ran the length of the valley. First in time was first in right. The earliest hand on the water held the creek in a dry year. Every latecomer took his turn or took nothing. But he had first turned the creek onto his hay meadow a year before that, in 1888. The first green after the die-up. He had never filed a paper on the water, and never thought he needed to. Who would argue the creek with the man who owned the ground on both its banks? Cora Byrne would, because Wesley Byrne had walked down to that same water 4 years before Bragg's deed, and 3 years before Bragg ever wet a crop with it. In 1885 he drove a stake where he meant to draw his ditch, nailed a notice to it in his own hand, and rode to the county seat to copy the same words into the recorder's book. He posted his claim, and he recorded it, both exactly as the statute asked. Then he went home to dig the ditch that would make the paper real, and a fever took him in the first week of the work, and the ditch ended where his shovel stopped. 4 years ahead of Bragg's deed, and 3 ahead of his first use, Wesley Byrne held the senior date. And a date, on water, was the only thing that mattered. "You posted at the point of diversion," Bragg said slowly. "You recorded it in the book." Wesley did. "I only kept the paper." Cora set the board down against the timber of the gate, careful, like a person setting down the one thing they own. 1885. You will find it in the county book if you doubt me. I have read the entry enough times to say it in my sleep. He did not doubt her. That was the whole trouble. He stood there with one hand on the iron wheel and did the cold arithmetic a rancher does, and it came out against him every way. Her date beat his deed by 4 years. Her right was senior. In the next dry summer, and this was already the second one, she could stand where he stood and call the whole creek onto her ground and leave his hay to burn brown, and no court in the territory would say a word against her. Except that a senior right moved no water at all without a ditch, and Cora Byrne had no ditch. She had a date, and a dead man's shovel, and a mile of dust between her stake and her field. The only finished ditch on the creek was the one Bragg's own hands had dug. Her paper needed his dirt. His dirt sat on her date. Neither of them could put a drop on an acre without the other, and both understood it before either said it out loud. "So we are tied," Bragg said. "We are tied," Cora agreed. There was a third party to it, and Bragg learned of the man too late and downwind, as a valley learns of a grass fire. Hollis Dean ran the Circle D at the foot of the valley, the biggest outfit on the creek and the thirstiest, and Hollis Dean had already ridden up to see the widow. "He offered to buy the date off me," Cora said. She did not soften it. $200 for a strip of my husband's handwriting. "He told me a woman had no business calling a river, and he would take the trouble off my hands like a kindness." 200. Bragg's jaw tightened. He knew to the penny what that date was worth in Dean's hands. A senior right on the only creek that had lived through the die-up was worth more than the ground it watered. With Wesley Burns' date recorded to the Circle D, Dean could call the valley dry from the bottom up, dry out Bragg and every outfit above him, and buy their scorched grass in the fall for pennies on the drought dollar. $200 was not an offer. It was a key to the whole basin, and he was trying to buy it off the one person too poor to be expected to know the price. You did not take it. I did not take it. Cora looked at him levelly. "Not for your sake." I rode to the recorder first, to be certain of what I held, and the clerk laughed at me across the counter. Laughed. He said the book could show a woman a date, but a woman would never make a date stand. He said no ditch company in this valley would honor a widow calling the creek, and I should sell to Dean while a man still wanted to pay for the privilege. She said it without heat, which was somehow worse than anger. So I came to find the man who dug the only ditch instead. But there was a knife folded into all of it, and Bragg found the blade before she would admit she already held it against her own throat. The same law that made her date senior also made it perishable. A right on water lived only by being used. A man who left his water in the creek year after year, who never dug, never diverted, never wet a crop, could lose the whole priority to anyone who troubled to file on the forfeiture. Wesley Byrne had recorded his right in 1885 and used not one drop of it since. 4 years idle, and it was ripe to be declared abandoned. There was a window in the statute, a narrow season in which the thing could still be filed and rescued, and that window was closing on her while they argued at the gate. Worse, there was the mirror of it, and the mirror was the temptation. Because forfeiture cut both ways. Bragg had used the creek in the open since '88, with no paper to his name, and every dry year he did it, his own unfiled use crept a little nearer to a right of its own, the kind the law hands a man for taking a thing so long that no one troubles to object. If Cora filed the forfeiture, called the river, and dried him out, she could break his use before it ever ripened. She could file inside the window, void his claim for good, and buy his place at the drought price with the very money Dean was waving under her nose. It was legal. It was clean. It would take her 2 days. No judge alive would frown at a widow protecting the only thing she owned. Bragg watched her hold that knowledge and declined to use it, and did not yet understand what he saw. The creek dropped. It was the second dry summer laid, end to end, and the water went down as money goes down. A little every day, until one morning there is a bottom no one knew was there. Bragg rode the ditch line twice a day. Cora came to work her rows and stayed to watch the creek, and the two of them fell into the habit of standing at the gate at evening. Not friendly, not unfriendly. 2 people counting the same falling water. They talked terms. That was all it was at first. She knew more law than he did, and he knew more dirt than she did, and neither would give the other the satisfaction of admiring it aloud. She showed him where Wesley had meant the ditch to run, and why the old line would have silted at the first flood. He showed her where the grade had to break to carry water the last quarter-mile to her field. They argued the fall of the land like two people each right alone for too many years. Then, on the 29th day of the dry spell, the headgate silted shut. Bragg found it at first light. A hard rain up in the hills had shoved a slug of gravel and mud down the creek, packed the gate solid, and behind it the water was already backing and spreading and going nowhere useful. Below the gate his ditch ran dry as a wagon road. And at the ford past the meadow his calves stood bawling at a stream with no stream in it, as stock will crowd a place where water is supposed to be and is not. He climbed into the cut with a shovel, and knee-deep in the muck he understood exactly what clearing the gate would cost him. Because clearing it would move water. Moving water meant laying the creek onto his grass again, in the open, in front of the whole valley. One more season of the good use that was quietly ripening into a right of his own. Every shovelful he threw dug his own claim a little deeper. And the one person on the creek who could stop that ripening, who could stand on the bank and let his gate stay choked and his claim die of pure idleness, was the woman coming up the ditch line toward him with the low sun behind her. Cora Byrne looked at the silted gate. She looked at the calves at the dry ford. She was quick with the law, and she saw in a breath what Bragg had seen, that a single day's delay here served her, that his ruin was written plain in the gravel if she only kept her hands in her pockets and let the water sit. She took off her coat. She climbed down into the cut. She lifted the second shovel from where it leaned against the timber, set the blade against the packed gravel beside his, and began to dig. "You know what this does," Bragg said. He had stopped working. "You clear this gate, you put my water back on my grass. You make my use good in front of God and the ditch company both. You kill your own forfeiture with your own 2 hands. Another 2 days and my claim rots on its own. You know all that. I know all that." Cora did not stop. The gravel came away in wet gray slabs under her blade. "The calves are at the ford now, Mr. Teague. Not in 2 days. Now those are my calves. They are thirsty calves." She threw a load up onto the bank. "I have not got the kind of patience that lets a living thing die of thirst to win a point of law. I never learned it. My husband died before he could teach me to be that hard." Bragg stood in the cut with the water beginning to shove cold against his boots, and he understood, 4 years late, what her date had been from the start. Not a threat held over his head. An offer he had never once had the wit to read. They cleared the gate by noon. The water came through in a brown rush and then ran clean, and it went down the ditch and reached the dry ford, and the calves put their heads down and drank. Cora stood on the bank with mud to her elbows and watched them drink like a person watching a thing they have paid dearly for. Bragg watched her instead. He had spent his whole life certain that a man held what he could hold and held it alone, that the creek was his because his name sat on both its banks, that need was a weakness other people carried. He had rebuilt his life on that after the die-up. And now a widow with a dead man's date and no ditch of her own had spent the single weapon she owned to water his stock on the 29th day. Before he had offered her so much as an empty barrel. A senior right unused was a right forfeited. Hers should have died in that ditch the moment she lifted the shovel. He could keep the whole creek now. The clerk had all but promised her he would. He could let the valley's own habit do the work. Let a woman's claim quietly lapse. And no honest man would call it theft. It would be the easiest water he ever kept in his life. He found that he could not do it. "Your date stands," Bragg said. "I will not hold water I have got no right to hold." Cora looked up from the calves. "You cannot give me back a right I just threw away with my own hands." "No," he said. "But I can stop pretending mine ever came first." The ditch company met in the schoolhouse at the county seat on the first cool evening of the fall. Every outfit on the creek crowded onto benches built for children. Hollis Dean sat in the front row with the settled look of a man who has already counted his water into his own trough. He had come to watch the widow's date pass to the Circle D, one way or another, and he had brought his lawyer to help it along. Cora sat at the back, with the mud washed off now, and the grey board flat on her knees. The company came at last to the creek and its rights, and Bragg Teague stood up. He did not argue that he owned the water. He said the opposite, out loud, to every neighbor he had in the world. He said a deed carried land and never carried a running creek, that his own deed to the ground dated only to 1889 and his use of the water only to 1888, and that neither one reached the water ahead of hers. Then he laid a fresh filing on the table, drawn that week at the recorder's office, and he read it plainly so the back benches could hear every word. "I have recorded my claim to this creek as of 88, he said. Junior, to the right, posted at the point of diversion by Wesley Byrne in 1885. His is the senior right on this water. Recorded and dated, first in time. I am asking the company to honor it over my own." The room went loud all at once. Dean came up out of his seat. "That right is forfeited," Dean said. "Idle 4 years and better. Byrne never dug a foot of ditch in his life. You do not get to raise a dead claim from the grave by being sentimental over a widow, Teague." "It was used," Bragg said, "last month. Water off that priority ran the length of my ditch to the ford, cleared by the holder's own hand, witnessed by me and by any man in this room who happened to ride the creek that morning. The right is alive. It has been put to good use inside the season, and the book shows the date it rests on. Read your statute before you go reaching for your greed." Dean turned on Cora then, because she looked to him like the softer target, and this was the fight he had wanted from the first. "You have no ditch, woman," he said. "A date is a scrap of paper. You will never move a drop of it, and you know as much. Sell to me tonight, and be done with the whole business." Cora stood up at the back of the room. She held the board up so the schoolhouse lamps caught the weathered face of it. "I have a date," she said. "He has a ditch. You have got neither one, Mr. Dean, and there is no sum of money on this earth that buys a way to the front of a line that closed in 1885. You are junior to both of us. You always were. You only hoped that no one in this valley had ever bothered to read the book." The ditch company honored the senior right. It could do nothing else, with the county book open on the table and the water already proved before witnesses. Wesley Byrne's date held the head of the line. Bragg Teague sat junior to it by his own signature, which not one man in that schoolhouse had ever seen a landholder do to himself. And Hollis Dean rode home junior to them both, with his lawyer and his $200, and no creek left to spend either one on. What Bragg and Cora did afterward was quieter, and it was the part that lasted. They drew a single ditch agreement and put both their names to it. His dirt and her date, one headgate serving both fields, neither one able to shut the other out, and neither one wanting to anymore. A senior right passed only by a signed and recorded conveyance, so Cora deeded a share of Wesley's priority into the agreement in her own hand. The first paper she ever signed for herself that a court would honor, and Bragg recorded it beside his junior claim so the two of them ran together down the same page. "You could have dried me right out," he said, at the gate, the full wind coming down the draw. "Filed the forfeiture, called the river, bought my grass with Dean's own money. 2 days, you told me. I could have." Cora set her hand on the iron wheel next to his. "I found I did not want the kind of water a person has to let something die of thirst to keep." Bragg turned the wheel. The creek came through the clean gate and ran down the ditch that carried two names now, past his meadow and on toward her dry field, and it began, an acre at a time, to turn the hard pond green. He had owned both banks of the creek. He had believed all his life that was the same as owning the water in it. A widow with a 4-year-older date had taught him the difference. And then, when the law finally handed her the entire creek to keep, she had turned around and handed most of it back. Some bargains a man wins by holding on with both hands. The best one Bragg Teague ever made, he won by letting go.